Hi, kitty cats. One of Trump's first acts after his inauguration as the 47th President of the United States was to sign an executive order redefining sex and gender. But both of these words are owned by science, not by government. So Trump's executive order is a direct attack not only on science, but on society. Make no mistake, every American is in danger with this executive order. All right, so I am Amethysta. I am an author and a podcaster. You can check the links that are rotating around below for more information about me and the work I do. My personal website you'll see come up, amethysta.io. You'll find all the social media networks I'm on if you want to follow me. That's how you can do it. My professional website, which just came up, is genderidentitytoday.com. All of my articles, all my podcasts are published there, as well as work from other contributors. So if you like this content, please consider subscribing at genderidentitytoday.com. You can get a subscription for as low as $2 a month. And if you would like to contribute content to Gender Identity Today, and I'd love that, you can contact me through my personal website contact page. The last link you'll see rotating here is goes to coffee.com. You can send a tip as you see fit, or don't, there you go. All right, let me do some welcomes here. I'm seeing Margie Fancy Pants. Hi, Margie. And I see Nijo, good to see you. Frybird, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to move on here. I want to talk about executive orders. And Matt's here too. Hi, Matt. How you doing? So I want to talk about this executive order. So Trump, at the very beginning of his campaign and toward the very end, he really ramped this up, made a campaign promise to take on the transgender community. Now, there were many reasons for this promise. Very obviously, he's trying to court the extreme Christian right, who believe that for some obscure reason we shouldn't be who we are. For the most part, though, what I see is that he was using scare tactics about women's safety. And I think he was trying to show that he's some kind of a tough guy. It's sort of comic to me. And I think that there are many other reasons. But both of those two that I just mentioned capitalize on the lack of understanding that I think most people, particularly Trump himself, it capitalizes on the lack of understanding of the transgender experience to obscure what I believe is the real point. And the real point is that in modern society here, using sex to determine societal superiority is becoming increasingly difficult to defend. It's hard to say men are the protectors, men should be running everything. It's becoming increasingly difficult to defend that standpoint. A majority of people believe that regardless of your assigned sex at birth, people believe that pay should be commensurate with their ability, not with their sex. Trump has even said, as he dismantled his DEI programs in the federal government, that he wants a government based on merit. Certainly he does. But transgender people, I believe, challenge this idea. Transgender women in particular challenge the idea that the distinction of owning particular genitalia gives you particular rights, gives you rights that you should have in society. And if that distinction goes away, how do you keep the patriarchy running? So I think enter this executive order, and I'm going to go through a lot of this. I want to go through it and highlight points. I don't want to read every word, because first of all, it's just depressing, but I do want to point out how incoherent it is. I want to point out how unscientific it is, and I want to point out how indefensible it's going to be, because I recognize many of us in the transgender community are afraid. Are we being invalidated by this executive order? Are we going to be rounded up and harmed? So I want to discuss the impact I believe this executive order is going to have, and then finally, I've got a little quick bit. If we get there, I want to discuss how we ended up here in the first place. So, November Rains has said, like I understand science, WTF. You're right, Amethysta Herrick, Ph.D. With my Ph.D. in science, I do struggle a bit. So hopefully November Rains, you can be there to help me out. Let me touch on a couple of comments here that we got. We've got Oh, thank you to Motivation and Prayer. Thank you to Matt for sending me small gifts. Thank you so much. Hannah, thank you for following. What else? Oh, and Steph, thank you for following. Grief Foundation, good to see you. Kitty Cat. I am going to, so Nijo, I want to read this, but I'm gonna give you a second. We'll get there. All right. So first thing I want to do, let me actually go to the document itself. That's right. I'm going to show a web page. Did it work? Oh gosh, it worked. Whew. All right. First of all, let's look at this title: Defending Women from Gender Ideology, Extremism, and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government. This is being couched. This is an executive order. It's being couched as an appeal to women's safety. It's like Trump is saying to all the men out there, he's like, hey guys, we all love women, right? Men got to keep them safe. Very patriarchal thought there, right? But he's using the word defending because it's intended to evoke righteous indignation. And really nothing else. Defending women, and we'll go through this, and I'll return to this a couple of times. Defending women. The other point I want to make out, this is going to be a quick aside, not quite sciencey, biological truth. So I'm going to say this flat out. Biology is a science. There is no truth or falsehood in science. There are only observations of nature. If what you observe, let me try that again, sorry. What we observe is data that ultimately we end up using to form a model. In the case of biology, it's to form a model of life. And this model itself can be valid or invalid, but it cannot be true or false. Valid or invalid just means, does it explain the observations of nature that we have, right? If we don't observe it, it's not a part of biology. It's a made-up thing. If we do observe it, however, it becomes an indelible part of science. So this word here, truth, is again being used to evoke more righteous indignation, okay? There's no other reason to use these here. So I'm going to scroll down here. I'm going to start just highlighting bits. And I realize, it may be sort of small. I will read what I'm going to talk about as well. So hopefully, you can follow along all right. So we're going to look at section 1, the purpose. Across the country, ideologues. So we're going into ideologues, denying reality, using legal and socially coercive means. Okay, so these are bad people. He's saying there are bad people, and it permits men to self-identify as women. Oh, okay, finally, we got to the point. Transgender women. They're transgender women. This goes against transgender women. But what are they doing? They are gaining access. They are gaining access to intimate single-sex spaces and activities designed for women. Some of those are women's domestic abuse shelters. This is an activity designed for women. Women's workplace showers. This is another intimate activity designed for women. Women's workplace showers. And it's wrong if transgender women gain access to domestic abuse shelters. That's apparently wrong. Okay? Now, notably absent here are the words sexual assault. Although that's clearly what's being implied here, right? But I have the sense that if the people who wrote this talked about sexual assault and it was being signed by somebody accused of such and had members of his cabinet or nominees to his cabinet accused of such, it might look a little foolish. So I'm kind of curious, that's an interesting way to have written this, that he really needs to protect places like domestic abuse shelters. I'm going to keep returning to that because it's great. All of this, when you have transgender women gain access to this, ultimately what this does is erasure of sex in language and policy. Okay, it's about language, interesting. And we get a corrosive impact, not just on women, but on the validity of the entire American system. That's right. Anybody out there who's transgender? Transgender women invalidate the entire American system. Whatever the hell that means. Is that a government? Is that the patriarchy? Is that what the hell is that? I don't even know. But here's a huge red flag. Basing federal policy on truth is critical to scientific inquiry. All right, I don't know President Trump, if you knew this, but scientific inquiry happened long before there was ever a federal policy. We scientists do not need your approval to observe nature. We just go out and we observe nature. That's what happens. We don't need Trump to give us this right to scientific inquiry. So maybe you go, well, where is this going to go? I think it's a good question. So we've got an attack against, this is the point, the ordinary and long-standing use and understanding of biological and scientific terms. What does this mean? This executive order is not about science. It's about the ordinary and long-standing use and understanding of terms defined by science. This is about language. This executive order gives not two damns about scientific definitions, and we'll see that below. But this is about how Trump chooses to use words. And what's great is that he wants to define how he uses words within the social environment of the United States of America, or at least federal policy, which means this is Trump's social construct. It's not observations of nature. Now, why would you do this? It turns out that invalidating some of this language improperly transforms laws designed to protect sex-based opportunities. Ask yourself about this. What opportunities? Opportunities for whom? For women? Or is it sex-based opportunities for men? What opportunity does a sex-based categorization offer that getting rid of that would damage? Or is this the sex-based opportunity to end up in a domestic abuse shelter? Is that what we're looking at here? Now, when these things get undermined, it replaces long-standing, cherished legal rights and values. Long-standing and cherished. Like what? Legal rights and values, like being sent to a domestic abuse shelter, are long-standing, cherished legal rights and values the fight that women have fought for equal rights for 150 years? Or is he talking about the Equal Rights Amendment that, oh yeah, actually has not actually been added as an amendment to the Constitution? What this is, flat out, is politicians speak for we intend to reinforce societal superiority based on genitalia. This is a way to reinforce the patriarchy that we're looking at right here, okay? And I want to go back up. Here, I'm gonna bring this back up. Let me make sure that this shows on the screen well. This is about defending women. Defending women. Let me tell you, if you are trying to defend women by perpetuating a patriarchy, by giving the sex-based opportunities to get lower pay, to get no maternity leave, and ultimately to end up in a domestic abuse shelter, God, with defenders like this, really, truly, women need no further aggressors. So thank you, President Trump, for bringing this all to into our daily lives. I can't even believe it. Patriarchy. Let me look at some of these. Let me look at some of the comments. I am looking here at TikTok now. Let's see. We've got. I want a video call. I'm sure. Why not? So let's see. There's no chat box. So yeah, unfortunately, no chat box. True. HVN SND. I apologize. So we science the hell out of these questions, says Matt. Got some really clear answers. I'm going to end up going into the policy and definitions. Let me see what we got here. Nijo, what do you got? Realization that Nijo had last night. Trump and his BS may actually be the best thing to have ever happened in the modern era. I think actually I'm going to agree with you on this. Trump has likely inadvertently caused all the super rich and powerful global elite and corrupt government figures to show their true colors. I actually agree with you. I think that this is going to cause us all to fight for our survival, which I believe will ultimately unite us. And I think there's some good. In that. Margie says that Trump is absolutely preying on fear. Bullying behavior is always an expression of cowardice. Yeah, very true. All right. Bo Hall says, put Donald Trump in prison. That's how we make women safe. There's some comedy to this, right? To be like, here's a guy who's been accused of rape, of sexual assault, claiming to defend women. There's some comedy to this. So, all right. Megan does say make sure I point out general provisions. The disclaimer at the end of that order makes most of it hot air. I'll do my best, Megan. Right. All right. What else do we have here? Donald Trump's policy sounds like a 10-year-old with a crayon. Whew. Yeah? All right. Let me go into this. So Grief Foundation, let's see. How could women coherently campaign for maternity leave if they were not all women? I'm unsure where you're going. If you end up pregnant, it doesn't make a difference whether you've got an M or an F on your birth certificate. You are pregnant and do deserve some sort of medical care regarding pregnancy. You know, I know Grief Foundation, you do want to get me to say it's really important that we have these categories, but I don't believe that's true. All right, I'm going to move on to policy and definitions here. So here we are, section 2, policy and definitions. So I'm going to say, so if you've ever watched any of my stuff, you know, this is not going to surprise you. It is the policy. But let me actually, I want to say first, before I talk anything about this at all, part of me doesn't even want to touch these definitions. Like, the purpose is enough. Trump needs to enforce a patriarchy through twisting language. He was pretty dang explicit about it. And most of the analysis I've seen on this executive order has been on the science. But the purpose says this isn't about science. This is about how Trump wants words to be used. And so to me, like, attacking the scientific inaccuracy kind of feels like attacking a fantasy novel for not being historically accurate. You know, because you're like, well, it was a fantasy novel. You know, there's no reason for it to be historically accurate. This is about language. This executive order is about language. There's no reason for it to be scientific, right? But I'm going to get there. I am going to say this. I'm seeing Brittany Allison. Hi, Brittany. I do want to recognize you. Thanks so much. You always give me good, challenging questions. So I wanted to recognize you there. Say hi. All right, here we go. It is the policy of the United States to recognize two sexes, male and female. Wow. Good on you. Policy of the United States. Do you know what biologists say? Biologists, when categorizing species, tend to look at two different things tend to look at the pieces of genetic material that combine for sexual reproduction and do the same. Almost universally, biologists observe species that create only two gametes, each of which end up with a definition to make two sexes, male and female. So this is not the policy of the U.S. This is actual biology. Get out of town, right? It does not explain what sex is. All of these definitions are down below, which you go, is that well done? But sex, just to make sure we're all on the same page here, sex is a reference to the capability to contribute a gamete to reproduction. And that's all that sex is. We'll talk more about other stuff below, but this is not a surprise. Okay, next thing says these sexes are not changeable, are grounded in fundamental and incontrovertible reality. Well, incontrovertible reality implies observations of nature. We've now shifted. Is it about language? Is it about science? We're not really sure. But incontrovertible reality should imply, fundamental reality should imply we're observing nature. So if we were to look at this, biologists actually do observe species in which individuals change sex. So this is untrue. Sexes are changeable in some species. They're not. The observations in nature show that they are. And maybe you're going, come on, Amy. Clearly this is supposed to refer only to humans, but it doesn't say that. It talks about a word that's defined by science that applies to all species, not humans. So it doesn't say that. All right, now I'm going to jump down. This one's ugly, I'm going to tell you. Section 2D. Female means a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces the large reproductive cell. All right, I'm going to go through these not necessarily word by word. But look at this. A person. Oh, now we've dropped to the individual language. We're not talking about the classification of a species. Now we're talking about an individual. So this understanding of sex is the ordinary and long-standing use and misunderstanding of the word sex that should have been gender the whole time. But we have misunderstood its use. So it's under ordinary and long-standing use, and this is going to perpetuate it right here. It is not, however, incontrovertible reality. It is not based on observation of nature, because observation of nature makes sex very vague. Gender, on the other hand, refers to an individual. So here's another thing that caught my eye. Person, and not human. I'm not really sure why that is. Human implies a member of the species Homo sapiens. Person implies a human with legal and social characteristics, including consciousness, self-awareness, personal agency. It's also a human that possesses rights and responsibilities. It's more than just a human. So they use the word person. I believe, and this is just me, I believe using the word person opens the door to discrimination. Who among us has consciousness? Who is truly self-aware? Who ends up being a savage? Who doesn't deserve rights? Who does? It's tricky wording there. At conception. At conception. Make no mistake here. This is an attempt to tie not just life to conception, that life begins at conception, but human identity and personhood are tied to conception. Now, this would likely be used to attack abortion further. That's probably pretty clear. But I think it also claims that the identity of a person, not a human, but a person, that claims that the identity of a person, that their life, the capability they're going to end up having, the sex-based opportunities, including, escaping to a domestic abuse shelter, are all set at conception. I think that's a frightening concept here. Now we'll go to the cute bit here. To the sex that produces the large reproductive cell. We finally got to the concept of sex, at least the scientific concept of sex, which is production of gametes. Now it doesn't use the word gamete. Why? Who knows? But just to now deconstruct this, at conception, what we have is a zygote. We don't have a person who is producing gametes at all. A zygote has no differentiation. A zygote is two pieces of genetic material that have combined with the potential to grow into something that might differentiate, that might be born, that might end up having things like rights and responsibilities. As I don't know if that ginger dad is here, not seeing, but he pointed out as well in a video on TikTok that at conception, there's also no guarantee the zygote will ever develop capability to produce gametes. I will add to that, because I study genetics. As it happens in genetics, which, by the way, is probabilistic. It is not deterministic. It is probabilistic. You might end up with a zygote that's sterile, that will make no gametes. You might end up with a zygote that's going to display intersex characteristics that prevent particular reproductive parts from developing. You might end up with intersex characteristics such that the zygote will differentiate and create both gametes. You might also end up with a zygote that doesn't survive at all. Might not be viable. So I can attack this on science pretty much all day long because it's really ridiculous. But I'm going to throw this out here. I'm just going to sum up, okay? At conception, a zygote has no reproductive parts, no guarantee that it will develop them, and is not a person. Scientifically, this is nonsensical and a nightmare. All of the ways to attack the science of this point to the need for a different word. And fortunately, biology provided that. That word is gender, which is the individual genetic, biochemical, physical, and social situation of a member of the species, of a species. So this statement here there's no basis in science. It doesn't even make sense. I think it's going to end up being used in nefarious ways. Now that we've defined male and female, we can go up to this here, which ends up being the definition of sex, which you'll notice it's a circular definition. Well done, whoever these are. Obviously, these are not scientists writing these things. Sex shall refer to an individual's immutable biological classification as either male or female. So sex now has to do with something that is apparently immutable, unfortunately nonsensical, because it's male or female as defined. Except immutable, Immutable. Humans are not born sexually mature. Let's say we even go from birth. Humans are not born sexually mature. We make no gametes at birth. If gametes, producing the large reproductive cell, is what creates male or female, then at conception, even at birth, we are not biologically classified as male or female. At sexual maturity, then we start to make gametes, and then we would do it, and at another time in life, we may stop making gametes. Let's say we had accidents, let's say biochemical changes occur, just pure age. Ultimately, the point is that the biological classification of sex is not immutable, because it has to do with whether or not we have the capability of contributing a gamete to reproduction, and we don't always. So there we go. Now we have a definition that's building on the nonsense. We're already, this is a good time. The last thing I'm going to bring up here, women or woman and girls or girl shall mean adult and juvenile human females respectively. Now they're using human. That's interesting. They're using human, but then they're using female, which is defined with person. Perhaps I'm reading too much into this, given the quality of logic in the rest of this document, but really interesting. Adult and juvenile. Adult and juvenile. What is an adult? What is an adult? Is this the age of voting? Is this the age you can go and buy cigarettes? Is it the age of sexual consent in any one of the 50 states? I mean, let's give these people the benefit of the doubt, okay? They're clearly not scientists. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's assume it means sexual, it refers to sexual maturity. And that makes sense, right? Because the definition of female refers to gametes, not just in, Trump's little social construct here that I'm going through, but even in biology, right? So let's say it talks about sexual maturity. If a girl is somebody who has not reached sexual maturity, she doesn't produce the large reproductive cell. I've already talked about this. So clearly she's not female, in which case, according to all of this, juvenile human female is a contradiction in terms. So I got to tell you, at this point, I kind of want to move on because I'm sort of feeling dirty. I'm going to address a couple of comments, and then I want to hit a couple more points on this, but it's truly amazing. All right, what do we got here? Not much going on here on TikTok, which is good. Let me look. I got a lot of stuff on YouTube. All right. Our rights come from... So here we go. So Brittany Allison says, our rights come from Biden's executive orders that Trump very recently overturned. We need solid legislation that can't be overturned. Brittany, I agree with you. The executive branch does a lot of things through the executive branch that don't end up becoming legislation. And it's an interesting, point to make there. But, all right. Grief Foundation says patriarchy is an odd notion. I grew up in the UK under Margaret Thatcher. Was that a matriarchy? That's a good question. I am talking about a United States executive order. I don't know that I would necessarily say that Margaret Thatcher indicated a matriarchy, although I would certainly say that it indicated a bit more of an enlightened state than the United States has been able to achieve. But I do agree with Matt, who says simply putting a woman in charge doesn't make a patriarchal system a matriarchal one. So, all right, what else do we have here? That's interesting. Gosh, I don't know what this word is, but Margie says buried under the U.S. and Canada, there's a confederacy. Forgive me for not pronouncing it. The oldest existing democracy on earth. That was an example of a matriarchy. If you look at several Celtic, especially if you look at British tribes, British Celtic tribes, there are several tribes where sovereignty passed through the women, sovereignty passed through the mother. So, so there you go. Grief Foundation is saying that the term patriarchy is obsolete in pretty much all Western nations. I'm going to disagree. When I'm going to say patriarchy, what I'm saying here is a social system that ultimately defines societal superiority based on genitalia. And there is no doubt that in the United States, women end up having fewer opportunities. And they're opportunities that are sex-based. I mean, it says right here, sex-based opportunities, okay? That's why we're talking about this. I think that's why this executive order even agrees, or even exists. All right, I want to talk about this last bit, gender ideology. I'm really surprised, first of all, that somebody finally defined this. My gosh, it's been floating around out there. Somebody finally defined it. Unfortunately, the way it's defined is pretty poorly done. I want to point out that it does make some message or make some there's some verbiage about requiring all institutions of society. Like, I'm not even going to ask how many people in the TikTok comments came into the chat, called me a man, and then got booted. Thank you, by the way, Frybird and Matt. There is clearly no requirement to respect me. I mean, it's not even close to true. I do appreciate this. Gender ideology is internally consistent. Hey, much like those definitions right above. So well done on that. And then it also diminishes sex as an identifiable or useful category. I'm going to challenge this because Grief Foundation, you've already said that these are useful categories. Are they useful categories? This is important. This is an important line because what it does is say that sex is useful because of the sex-based opportunities, including being able to head off to a domestic abuse shelter. All right? Keep that in mind. So now that we've gotten to more or less the end, I'm not even going to bother with their definition of gender identity. I want to go back up to the top. We've got definitions, right? Definitions. Are these defending women? What does this do to defend women? Is it doing anything? First of all, it's not talking about truth. We've already seen that. So is it defending women? Really, no. All right, let me go through section 3 because I'd love to get this out of my mouth. So this here, ultimately what we're looking at is changing language on websites, government documents. So they want to get rid of the X on things like passports. That's important for people who don't want to identify either as an M or an F. There are also, what do we got here? Documents. There are also, I'm going to get here, more documents. All right, so it also wants to roll back the decision of Bostock versus Clayton County, which did include gender identity, albeit somewhat subtly, as a protected class under the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title VII in this case. So wants to roll that back. Now, keep that in mind, okay? This is an executive order. Then we move down here, Section 4, privacy and intimate spaces. What this is going to do is make sure that transgender women can't go into those same-sex locations and activities designed for women, which interestingly includes single-sex rape shelters. This is really on their mind. So domestic abuse shelters, rape shelters, these are things we need to make sure that women are protected when they're inside. I'm going to make a stupid comment here, perhaps. How about if we protect them before they end up having to go to a domestic abuse shelter or a rape shelter? Huh? Can we do that? Then you don't have to worry about whether or not they're going to be safe when they're in there from somebody like me. But let's think about this for a moment, okay? Because what we talked about was transgender women going into these single-sex spaces, but we're talking about a domestic abuse shelter. Domestic abuse. Domestic abuse means it happens in the domicile. That is what a domestic abuse is. That's not happening in a bathroom. That's not happening in a locker room. Who's committing these? Is it transgender women? Protecting rights, here we are. We can keep on going here. The implementation has a bunch of killing things off. You know, we've got to make sure that we throw away, rescind all guidance documents like transgender equality. You certainly don't want that. You certainly don't want anything that's going to improve the Civil Rights Act. That's ridiculous. You don't want to support LGBTQI plus youth and families. Certainly not. You're definitely not going to do it in Spanish, right? Because those people aren't even citizens of the United States. If you come to the U.S., clearly you speak English. All right, the disclaimer. If any provision of this order, I finally got here, Megan. See, it took me a little while. If any provision of this order or the application is held to be invalid, the remainder of the order and the application of its provisions shall not be affected thereby. For what it's worth, there's a whole lot that's invalid here, but it does sort of point out, and hopefully, Megan, this makes your point, that they recognize that this has a bunch of foolishness in it. Oops, I need to scroll that up. Sorry, I didn't see. If the provision is held to be invalid, so the rest of it is not affected. So, sure. All right. I'm going to get away from this document now. Let me look at a couple of comments here. Minnie, thank you, first of all, for sharing the live with so many people. That's amazing. Thanks. I appreciate you. Going back here, personal belief of Nijo's is that life begins before conception as a thought, a spark of consciousness. I actually stand with you on that. Conception is only to make a body into which that consciousness will end up going. So pretty interesting point. I love that. Identity is tied. So Grief Foundation says identity is tied to conception, is not necessarily tied to conception, but sex is. Untrue. Because there are biological things that could occur. There are biochemical things that could occur. If you, let's just talk about the SRY gene. The SRY gene creates the SRY protein, which irritates the mother to secrete enough testosterone to jumpstart male reproductive differentiation in an embryo. At that point, it's not guaranteed that the genetics of the embryo are going to make some sort of sex. There's a dependence on the mother as well. You might be able to say that female reproductive parts being the defaults could be tied to conception, but there's too much of human development that occurs in utero. It's insufficient. So Nijo asks, does this suggest that infertile women are then not considered persons? Good question. Hey, what about people who are stuck in mental institutions? What about people who are in jail and are getting things like saltpeter so that they can't get an erection and stuff like that? It's a really good question, Nijo. Persons is a very frightening way to go through this. Let's see. Mom's single mother of triplets. My goodness. All right. There's a bit of a conversation going back and forth. All right. Let me talk about the impact. Oh, hang on. Grief Foundation does ask one more question. Keen to know if I think there's any utility in single-sex space or organization. Any utility? It's a good question. Well, I would ask first, what would be the purpose? Now, certainly there is, I will say this flat out, I know many women who are afraid of men. And I think with good reason. We've just talked about domestic abuse shelters. We've talked about rape shelters. I think there's a good reason for some women to be afraid of men. So I will not say that that a single-sex space or organization is necessarily bad. My point is that when you try to define identity by that, because these women are afraid of men because men have been aggressive. It's not because necessarily they're men. It's because men have been aggressive toward them. So All right. I hope I end up with time to address this. Did I see about the bill in Mississippi? I want to get to it, but let's talk about the impact of this executive order, because there are some interesting points here. All of this had to do with transgender women, right? They talk about gender ideology extremism, but there's no mention of transgender men. The pessimist in me says that Trump's like, hey, you're joining the patriarchy. You're okay with me. But the executive order addresses gender identity, which should certainly include them. The point is that they make the title continues to say stuff about defending women, but this is a clue that this isn't about women. I also want to say that I believe this is a very unique executive order. Executive orders don't generally define valid identities, which this one does. It says what makes a person, ultimately. It defines valid identities. And governments are not supposed to do that. Governments are supposed to create and enforce laws, and laws do not govern identity. Laws govern the behavior of people, citizens of that particular country. They don't govern identity. So this is an attempt, I believe, as Nijo says, to invalidate some persons and make them just humans. It's not at all just about transgender people. If this is what you think, you're fooling yourself, all right? This is an attack not just on science, but on anybody not part of the patriarchy, period. All right. What is an executive order? First of all, an executive order is guidance. It's a suggestion. It's how the president would like to see the government run, but it's not a law. Laws come from the legislative branch, and the president is part of the executive branch. The executive branch, as I mentioned before, it executes and enforces laws. It doesn't make them. That being said, this executive order does mean something because it can change policy that's owned by the executive branch. It's not the law of the land, but it can change how things in the executive branch run. And we've already seen this. Passports, we've already seen changes. Apparently, I will tell you, I'm unsure because I did not see this directly, but I have heard that some of the guidance may already have been implemented, like gender markers on passports. Government websites have changed. Should we be worried? I don't know that I want to say this. Yes or no. At the time of this recording, at least one of these executive orders has already been challenged. There are many reasons to challenge this particular executive order. At least the state of New York has in its constitution recognition of gender identity as a protected class. At least the state of New York. There may be others, and I'm going to tell you, I don't know. But an executive order, the federal government, period, cannot overturn state laws. But more than that, the U.S. Constitution has at least the 14th Amendment, which guarantees equal treatment under the law. If you're going to change certain people's protection under the law, treatment under the law, that's a clear violation of the 14th Amendment. Bostock versus Clayton County was a Supreme Court decision. An executive order can't do anything to overturn a Supreme Court decision. And then, of course, like I said, we do still have the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which is federal law. So should we be worried? I'm going to return to my question. Should we be worried? I think where things go from here is wildly speculative. It's kind of hard to say. I wish I could tell you. I am concerned, certainly. But worst case scenario, and believe me, this is a bad scenario. Worst case scenario, in 4 years, when this administration has exited the building, it can all be rolled back. 4 years is an awfully long time to wait for your identity to be valid. I am going to say, Nijo says, stand up, speak out, fight back, loud and proud, with ya. Better do it. Better do it. What else do we have? Make shelters obsolete, Margie says. So true. If they are needed, let all who need them access them. I don't think I disagree. Margie also mentions genotypically XY, but has a recessive X-linked trait, tetrachromacy, due to a bone marrow transplant at age 3. Wow, so Margie is a chimera. Chimerism is an interesting thing. Genetically, what that means is that you have more than one genotype in your cells. Genotype meaning this is the actual genetics per cell. So that's fascinating. I didn't know that, Margie. That's pretty cool. Oh gosh, Nijo says she knew a guy. Okay. Said some 3 or 4 sets of DNA. Crazy. That's really crazy. All right, Nijo asks, what do I think Trump and his MAGA cult would do if they found out about the furry community? I have no idea. The whole thing is so goofy. Really, so goofy. All right, how do we fix this? Why is this executive order even possible? I believe, flat out, and I'm just going to say it in plain words, this is Christianity's effect on science. Not today, but hundreds of years ago. The Renaissance was a rebirth out of the Dark Ages, characterized by a supremacy of religion, not reason. The Renaissance was supposed to bring us into the age of reason. But I will tell you, during the Dark Ages, scientists were afraid of the Catholic Church. Because if you went against the Catholic Church, you had the unfortunate tendency to end up burned at the stake. There's a good reason why people were afraid of them. But even to, and this is, 14th century, 15th century that we're talking about here. But even 200 years later, midway through the 1800s, so even in the 19th century, the theory of evolution in the book that Darwin wrote, The Origin of the Species, didn't include humans. Darwin was very careful not to imply that humans were part of nature and therefore subject to evolution. This is Charles Darwin. I mean, zoinks. But why does this make a difference? Christianity places humans above nature. I mean, if you look at it particularly in Genesis, humans are either a steward of or having dominion over the earth, which depends on the translation you choose to read. And I'm bringing that up to say that religion can twist its scripture to continue to keep humans outside of nature. Now, who's to blame here? Firmly, it's on science. Science is to blame. Scientists don't want to deal with people. It's like a joke to go, yeah, you don't like people? Go into the sciences. Go be science, technology, engineering. Leave people to those hippies, right? The hippies in the arts. But the hippies in the arts then go on to become lawyers and politicians. You don't get a lot of scientists in politics. And Donald Trump really fucking clearly is not a scientist. What we need to do is, first of all, demand integration of science into the human experience. And this lies both with scientists and with artists. Our lives are not one or the other. We are not just bags of chemicals. We are not just disconnected minds and emotions. We are biological bodies that exist within a social environment. And a law cannot be written to govern only one part. Laws must be based in science. Laws must not redefine science to suit political agendas. This may be the longest lecture that I gave here. Usually I'm about half of this. I'm finally finished. That's everything I wanted to present today. Now I'm going to answer this one question. Where did that go? Where was your Frybird? There's a bill in Mississippi. I don't know where you put it. State Bill, I believe, 2319, something like that. I just saw a video about it on TikTok, which cracked me up. All right. So the bill reads, and forgive me if I get this slightly wrong here, because, I read it once, but what it does is actually make illegal discharging genetic material. All right. So this is men discharging genetic material without the express purpose of fertilizing an embryo. So that the wording is poor there because it should be fertilizing an ovum, not an embryo. An embryo is, a zygote that has survived. But so I find that fascinating. Now, what's super fascinating? Oh, hey, catastrophe, just design catastrophe. I find that fascinating because first of all I looked at it, I was like, oh my gosh, did sex become illegal in Mississippi? Because that's kind of crazy. But if you go toward the end of it, like the very last thing says, like, it's okay, first of all, if you discharge genetic material to give it somewhere else. Yes, conception begins at erection. Thank you, Matt. That's the name of the act. Conception begins at erection. So it's okay. It's okay if you donate sperm. That's fine. Like, people, they're cool with that. Let that go. They're also cool if you use other contraception. I find that fascinating. So if you use other contraception, if you're using a condom, if you're using a IUDs type thing, if you've had a vasectomy, who the hell cares? Hey, if you've had an orchiectomy, apparently you're cool. Heading down to Mississippi, go at it. Maybe not. But I found that fascinating because what it does, first of all, as my wife mentioned, is that it puts the responsibility very clearly on the male, I should say, the person who has an erection, the person who has an erection. It puts the responsibility squarely on that person. I think that's kind of neat. Like, because usually when you look at these things, like we're restricting bodily autonomy, right? Women aren't allowed to go get abortions. Perfect. Then men should not be allowed to get erections. Like, go at it. Well done. I actually think that's all right. But the other thing, too, is that it says things like rape. Like, if you don't get convicted of rape, which you probably oughta, you could still be convicted and fined for discharging genetic material without intending to fertilize an ovum. So really super crazy, really interesting bill there. I'm trying to figure out if I like it or don't, because I'm like, well, who put this bill up here? And I didn't go through enough of that information to find out, but super fascinating. Let me look at some comments here. What do we got? Don't have an O unless you want a baby. Yep, that's what I'm looking at. It's kind of fun. DMV just texted at the start of the live because they'll find me if I don't go to the DMV tomorrow. Wow. I got to imagine the reason why is because they want to make sure your M or your F on your driver's license is there. I had a thought there too. This is an interesting point. Like, on my driver's license at this point, it says F, right? It says that because that's what, I changed my gender marker here in Colorado. Whether or not this is good or bad, I'm not going to debate. What does that do for me? And actually, I'm asking you a little bit here, Grief Foundation. What does that end up doing for me? Like, does that grant me any sort of privileges? Does it make a difference if I've got, sex : F on my driver's license? Because it doesn't open up, like, there are other medical conditions that I think would be much better. Like, let's say you've got sex : F, but I'd rather have broken legs : 0, right? Like, I want to know if you're driving with 0, 1, or 2 broken legs, especially if you have like a clutch, right? If you've got like a stick shift, I want to know that you're driving with two broken legs, because that may make a difference in how well you're doing, how much capability you have to operate a vehicle. So anyway, I think I'm going to leave it at that. I feel like I had a purpose for that. I'm not really sure what I was doing with it, but all right, let me see. Looking again at these. Nijo says, God giving us dominion over the earth means we have the ability to shape and mold the world, to tame the beasts and the land. It speaks not to a god, but a capability unique to humans. Disagree. What about beavers? Beavers make dams. What about ants? Ants can make huge bridges out of their bodies. I'm not completely disagreeing with you. I know I'm disagreeing by saying that the biblical verse I don't think was only supposed to highlight a capability unique to humans. The modern translation, because the early translation had to do with steward of. That's the original Hebrew, from what I understand. I'm not a Hebrew scholar, but it said steward of, meaning we were supposed to care for the land, not shape and mold the world, not tame the beasts in the land, but take care of it. So it's the dominion over that is more frequent. That's a more recent translation. I said frequent, I meant recent. A more recent translation. So Nijo also says us being created in his image is not that we physically look like him/her, but that like him, her, we also have the ability to think in abstract ways and be creative. Yeah, I mean, I think we're giving this, you're giving credit that to modern translations and modern thought the story of Genesis, though, is an allegory for early Kabbalistic thought. So early Hebrew mysticism, Jewish mysticism, that came out as an allegory. And if you look at Kabbalah, like really, really low-level Kabbalah, there's the idea of Adam Kadmon, which is every person. I think it translates literally as every man, but then also Chava, which has been anglicized as Eve, which means really your feminine capabilities. So the idea would be that you need an integration between your physicality, which is your masculine characteristics as they exist in the world, and your feminine characteristics, which is your internal ability to think and to emote. So you need some way of integrating the two. And this is early Kabbalistic thought. And if anybody cares, I can actually recommend a book. I'd have to look for it, but I can recommend a book if you're interested in seeing some of those. So again, I'm Genesis to take this and to take this and turn it into modern translations that don't treat it as an allegory, like, it's fascinating to me. So, all right, here we go. Grief Foundation says, in America, let's see, we're in America, so unfortunately that driver's license is used for ID during an arrest. So primarily, yeah, what jail you go to. I don't agree, or I don't disagree, but here's my question. If you go there, like if I go there, here's a good question. If I went to prison before I had, or jail, if I were arrested and detained before I had surgery, would it have made sense to put me in a block based on my driver's license? Because really the thing would have been, would I have been a danger to somebody? Like they would have put me in a block, depending upon where I was, they would have put me into a block in part based on my opinion. In New York, that's absolutely the case. And I know that because of the criminal case that I was part of. So, not that it came against me, where I testified as an expert witness. So I don't know. Does it do much more than what jail you go to? Because here's the other thing. They can also do a medical exam when you go in there, and oftentimes they will. Part of the medical exam is most likely to be, to look at genitalia. Like, how is that tough? No, I don't think driver's license gives you much more than that. Look at this. Nijo says ravens have tamed wolves. They'll lead them to prey and carcasses so they can eat. No way, really? Spiders keep frogs as pets? Wow, that's pretty dang cool. I love that. Oh gosh. All right, let me see. What else do I have? I've gotten into my watch. I think so. All right. It is now 1:59. This was an exhausting live. I hope that this ended up doing anything for you. Hopefully that talking through this executive order shows you that it's going to be, first of all, relatively indefensible. It's going to have relatively indefensible. Wow, that was pretty vague. It's going to be indefensible. There are many ways in which this is going to be attacked, whether it's from the science, whether it's from the legal standpoint, from the social standpoint. There are many ways it's going to be chewed up. I don't want to say you shouldn't be concerned, because I'm not going to tell you, that you shouldn't be frightened, that you shouldn't worry about things. But I will say that people are already standing up. Things like this right here, me doing these live streams like this, I'm doing it because I need to stand up. We all need to stand up. And Nijo says, I'm going to read it again because it was well put. I got to find the caps here. I'm going to read it again, and then I'm probably going to shut this down. Oh, why am I not going to be able to find it, of course. But stand up and fight back. Here we go. Nijo says, and I'm going to leave you with this thought: stand up, speak out, fight back, loud and proud. So I think with that, I will certainly thank everybody who has attended today, who has shown up in the live. Definitely want to thank Matt for moderating, not just in TikTok, but also on YouTube. Thank you, Frybird, for your moderating on TikTok as well. I only do these things because somebody seems to care that I talk about them. So thank you to everybody who cares about me talking about them. I'm going to give you a big heart to figure out how to do this. And I'll see you next week.